The thorough analysis of the origin of species. Lesson 20. A male mule is a seedless watermelon. Charles Darwin describes hybridism in chapter 9. The dictionary says species is a population that breeding is possible by copulation. Systematic affinity is a general resemblance between species in structure and constitution, though neither sterility nor fertility affords any certain distinction between species and varieties. It is clear that the fertility of first crosses and of the hybrids produced from them is largely governed by their systematic affinity, and the degree of fertility both of first crosses and of hybrids graduates from zero to perfect fertility. In the second place, it is almost as much opposed to the theory of natural selection as to that of special creation, that in reciprocal crosses the male element of one form should have been rendered utterly impotent on a second form, whilst at the same time the male element of this second form is enabled freely to fertilize the first form, for this peculiar state of the reproductive system could hardly have been advantageous to either species. A certain naturalist entertained the view that species, when intercrossed, have been specially endowed with sterility in order to prevent their confusion by a reciprocal cross between two species. Charles Darwin means the case, for instance, of a female ass being first crossed by a stallion and then a mare by a male ass. On this occasion, these two species may then be said to have been reciprocally crossed, and the fertility of the offspring changes. This phenomenon is not because species have been endowed with a different degree of sterility, but because sterility depends on the slight and mysterious tendency of nature, which we cannot detect. The lesser or greater fertility is due to the difference of affinity between species and varieties. This indicates that sterility is labile and plastic, and he says, if we look at species as having been specially created and at varieties as having been produced by secondary law, this similarity would be an astonishing fact, but it harmonizes perfectly with the view that there is no essential distinction between species and varieties. Charles Darwin supposed that species have been produced by special acts of creation and acknowledged that varieties have been produced by secondary law. That is to say, he says, organic beings had been created originally and after that have varied continuously. We, when reading Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species, occasionally encounter such clause as species had not been created, or this is inexplicable by the creation. Evolutionists say these are the very proof that Charles Darwin denied the creation. But seeing through their exact meanings from the context, we can retain the firm grasp on the abbreviation of separately and separate respectively. Namely, the above two sentences were species had not been created separately, and this is inexplicable by the separate creation in a true sense of word. The reason why the two sentences should be translated into species had not been created separately, and this is inexplicable by the separate creation will be discussed in lesson 27, 28, 29 in surprisingly full detail. It's because this is a starting point that Charles Darwin's real intention is distorted by the evolutionists. It is the most important goal of this project to disclose clearly the difference between species had not been created and species had not been created separately. Shalom. Aleichem.